everyone. Welcome to the December 2023 webinar for the International Environment Forum. This weekend, we're going to have Christine Muller talk about individual freedoms and the Baha'i perspective and how this relates to environmental sustainability and international agreement on dealing with the environment. Christine is, I'm sure most of you know, the linchpin in the International Environment Forum organization. She's on the board of directors. She's been serving with the institution for how many decades now? She teaches a Wilmette Institute course on climate change and one on sustainability. And she is a wealth of knowledge on all this stuff. So we are very fortunate to have her speak with us today. We're going to start with some devotions, and then we'll go into a lecture format. The lecture format might last up to an hour, and then we'll have some Q&A and discussion at the end if you'd like to hang around. So we'll start with some music.
Thank you very much, Kayla, for the nice introduction. It's wonderful to be with you. And this music is actually part of the talk because of the lyrics. Da, 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 da. Zoom, 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 zoom. Welcome to the newcomers. This hidden word is central to our presentation today, and we'll come back to the words later on. So let me share the screen for the slides. And I hope you can see them. So there are many references in the Baha'i teachings regarding freedom and liberty. I have always been fascinated by this topic. Many philosophers have extensively written about liberty, but we will not even attempt to summarize the literature. All I want to do is share some highlights from the Baha'i teachings and how we can apply these teachings in our lives, especially in the area of environmental sustainability. Let us begin with the fundamental statement Baha'u'llah makes in the Kitab-e-Aqdas. We approve of liberty in certain circumstances and refuse to sanction it in others. This, of course, raises the question about when Baha'u'llah approves liberty and when not, and what the deciding circumstances might be. There seem to be two different categories of liberty or freedom: outer freedom and inner freedom. In English, the words freedom and liberty are often used in the same way as synonyms. Often, though, a distinction is made. Liberty is generally used in the social context, what we will call outer freedom. The word freedom more often refers to the inner psychological condition, what we will call inner freedom here. However, the word freedom is also often used for outer freedom. The translators of the Baha'i writings seemed to have used a similar methodology, the word liberty for outer freedom, while the word freedom could stand for both outer and inner freedom. However, the translations are not consistent in that matter either. Personally, I find it more important to understand concepts than to dwell on words. The Baha'i teachings seem to strongly support outer freedom in some circumstances and restrict it in others. Inner freedom, on the other hand, has no limits. We will first explore what the Baha'i teachings say about outer freedom. When Abdu'l-Baha was in the United States, he said, "For you have been and are now living in freedom, and you have no fear of anybody. Is there a greater blessing than this? Freedom, liberty, security, these are the great bestowals of God." When the Baha'i teachings are especially strong regarding freedom from oppression. Baha'u'llah wrote in the hidden words, "O oppressors on earth, withdraw your hands from tyranny, for I have pledged myself not to forgive any man's injustice. This is my covenant, which I have irrevocably decreed in the preserved tablet and sealed with my seal of glory." Baha'u'llah directly calls on us to work for human rights and to fight oppression. Thou must show forth that which will ensure the peace and the well-being of the miserable and the downtrodden. Gird up the loins of thine endeavor, that perchance thou mayest release the captive from his chains, and enable him to attain unto true liberty. Baha'u'llah's prohibition of slavery affirms the equality of all human beings and their equal right to freedom. It is forbidden you to trade in slaves, be they men or women. It is not for him who is himself a servant to buy another of God's servants, and this has been prohibited in his holy tablet. Let no man exalt himself above another. All are but bondslaves before the Lord, and all exemplify the truth that there is none other God but him. So no individual has the right to restrict the freedom of another individual. The Baha'i teachings also strongly affirm the freedom of thought, belief, and expression. They say that the basic freedom to think and to express one's thoughts is important for the progress of humankind. Freedom of thought and speech enlarges the circle of one's understanding and leads to progress and unity. In a talk given in New York in 1912, Abdu'l-Baha further elaborated on that truth. Consider what a vast difference exists between modern democracy and the old forms of despotism. Under an autocratic government, the opinions of men are not free and development is stifled, whereas in democracy, because thought and speech are not restricted, the greatest progress is witnessed. It is likewise true in the world of religion. When freedom of conscience, liberty of thought, and right of speech prevail, that is to say, when every man, according to his own idealization, may give expression to his beliefs, development and growth are inevitable. So the freedom of belief and to express these beliefs openly and to practice one's faith is one of the basic tenets of the Baha'i teachings. Freedom of expression is essential for the well-being and advancement of society. However, the Baha'is in Iran and some other countries are restricted in their freedom to practice their faith. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the Baha'i faith, provided guidance in the dilemma between obedience to an oppressive government and practicing the Baha'i faith. He said, "For whereas the Baha'is should obey the government under which they live, even at the risk of sacrificing all their administrative affairs and interests, they should under no circumstances suffer their inner religious beliefs and convictions to be violated and transgressed by an authority whatever." A distinction of a fundamental importance must therefore be made between spiritual and administrative matters. Whereas the former are sacred and inviolable, and hence cannot be subject to compromise, the latter are secondary and can consequently be given up and even sacrificed for the sake of obedience to the laws and regulations of the government. Baha'is all over the world admire the way the Baha'i friends in Iran have been following this guidance. They have set an example for Baha'is in other countries who may sooner or later encounter similar restrictions on their religious freedom. So the Baha'i teachings strongly support outer freedom in the areas of freedom from oppression and freedom of thought and belief. However, according to the Baha'i teachings, there are aspects of outer freedom that must be restricted. Liberty must, in the end, lead to sedition, whose flames none can quench. Know ye that the embodiment of liberty and its symbol is the animal. That which beseemeth man is submission unto such restraints as will protect him from his own ignorance and guard him against the harm of the mischief maker. Liberty causes man to overstep the bounds of propriety and to infringe on the dignity of his station. It debaseth him to the level of extreme depravity and wickedness. So, according to Baha'u'llah, liberty needs to be restricted for two reasons. First, to protect humans from their own ignorance, and second, to guard them against the harm of the mischief maker. For that, we need just social laws. Abdu'l-Baha said, "The law must reign and not the individual. Thus will the world become a place of beauty, and true brotherhood will be realized. Having attained solidarity, men will have found truth." Just secular laws can help to reduce actions that are harmful to others and can protect society from criminal behavior. Laws can also prevent individuals to gain too much power that would allow them to oppress others. Of course, there are also religious laws that have been repeated by all the manifestations of God throughout religious history. For example, do not kill, do not steal. In some areas, liberty that could cause harm can be restricted by moderation. Whatsoever passeth beyond the limits of moderation will cease to exert a beneficial influence. Consider, for instance, such things as liberty, civilization, and the like. However much men of understanding may favorably regard them, they will, if carried to excess, exercise a pernicious influence upon men. So here, Baha'u'llah says that liberty is one of the things that require moderation. An example where we Baha'is are trying to apply both liberty and moderation is during consultation. All participants in a Baha'i consultation are called to express their views freely. At the same time, they are reminded to offer them in a considerate way and in courteous speech. We will come back to moderation later. Now, let us turn to the limitations of freedom imposed on us by the mere nature of being human. Abdu'l-Baha said, "All created things are captives of nature and subject to its laws. They cannot transgress the control of these laws in one detail or particular. The infinite starry worlds and heavenly bodies are nature's obedient subjects. The earth and its myriad organisms, all minerals, plants, and animals, are thralls of its dominion. But man, through the exercise of his scientific intellectual power, can rise out of this condition, can modify, change, and control nature according to his own wishes and uses." So one way how humans can free themselves from the physical limitations of nature is with science and technology. But science and technology can only increase our outer freedom. Moreover, we must use wisdom and moderation in the use of technology, and we will come back to that later. According to the Baha'i teachings, our true freedom can only be achieved with spiritual development. Like a butterfly that emerges from a cocoon, we must learn to free ourselves from our animal instincts and let our soul take charge of our lives. For the butterfly, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event, while human spiritual development is an unending journey. And that brings us to the concept of inner freedom. Baha'u'llah said, "Oh, how blessed the day when, aided by the grace and might of the one true God, man will have freed himself from the bondage and corruption of the world and all that is therein, and will have attained unto true liberty, unto true and abiding rest beneath the shadow of the tree of knowledge." Abdu'l-Baha wrote, "Every human being is limited through his physical body, but his spirit is free. The body of man may travel for a few miles and become fatigued, but the spirit, untrammeled, may go throughout the immensity of space. While walking on earth, man's thoughts may grasp the motions of the heavenly bodies and define their course. This demonstrates how man's spirit transcends his environment." However, not all people believe that a human being has a free will. Some people say that human actions are determined by their genes and upbringing. Thus, there is no freedom in choosing our actions. They don't believe in an inner freedom. Abdu'l-Baha provides a clear explanation in the book Some Answered Questions. The question was, is man free and unconstrained in all his actions, or is he compelled and constrained? And Abdu'l-Baha then said, "Certain matters are subject to the free will of man, such as acting with justice and fairness, or injustice and inequity. In other words, the choice of good or evil actions. It is clear and evident that the will of man figures greatly in these actions. But there are certain matters where man is forced and compelled, such as sleep, death, sickness, failing powers, misfortune, and material loss. These are not subject to the will of man, and he is not accountable for them, for he is compelled to endure them. But he is free in the choice of good and evil actions, and it is out of his own accord that he performs them." Now we come back to the hidden word we listened to at the beginning of today. "O my servant, free thyself from the fetters of this world, and loose thy soul from the prison of self. Seize thy chance, for it will come to thee no more." So, to gain inner freedom, we need to lose our soul from the prison of self, from our ego. The Guardian provides us with a clear explanation about the two meanings of self. Regarding the questions you asked, self has really two meanings, or is used in two senses in the Baha'i writings. One is self, the identity of the individual created by God. This is the self mentioned in such passages as, "He has known God who has known himself," etc. The other self is the ego, the dark animalistic heritage each one of us has, the lower nature that can develop into a monster of selfishness, brutality, lust, and so on. It is this self we must struggle against, or this side of our natures, in order to strengthen and free the spirit within us and help it to attain perfection. The Guardian then continues, "Self-sacrifice means to subordinate this lower nature and its desires to the more godly and noble side of ourselves. Ultimately, in its highest sense, self-sacrifice means to give our will and our all to God, to do with as he pleases. Then he purifies and glorifies our true self until it becomes a shining and wonderful reality." Baha'u'llah explained the depth of true liberty. "True liberty consisteth in man's submission unto my commandments, little as ye know it. Were men to observe that which we have sent down unto them from the heaven of revelation, they would, of a certainty attain unto perfect liberty. It is noteworthy that this passage is from the Kitab-e-Aqdas, the Book of Laws. Adhering to the laws ordained by Baha'u'llah will assure our true inner freedom. Accepting the divinely ordained limits to our outer freedom is releasing spiritual forces that expand our inner freedom. Fortunately, the Baha'i writings shed more light on how to go about progressing toward inner freedom and how to gain the victory over ourselves. Arise, O people, and by the power of God's might, resolve to gain the victory over your own selves, that haply the whole earth may be freed and sanctified from its servitude to the gods of its idle fancies, gods that have inflicted such loss upon and are responsible for the misery of the wretched worshippers.
If you guys want to put them in your ideas in the chat, ask the question again, Christine.
Yes. So what might these idle fancies be that are the gods of the ego? Maybe we can, if someone could read the quote once more.
Can I go ahead? So,
yes, please.
Arise, O people, and by the power of God's might, resolve to gain the victory over your own selves, that happily the whole earth may be freed and sanctified from its servitude to the gods of its idle fancies, gods that have inflicted such loss upon and are responsible for the misery of their wretched worshippers. These idols form the obstacle that impeded man in his efforts to advance in the path of perfection.
Thank you for reading. And thank you. We have to commence comfort and ease, that if I have a big house and a new fancy car, I will be happy. Pride, lust for power, feeling superior to others. These are all gods of idle fancies. In the long obligatory prayer, we pray, protect us, we beseech thee, O my Lord, from the hosts of idle fancies and vain imaginations. Thou, in truth, art the mighty, the all-knowing. All right, I think that we all agree that we must free ourselves from our lower self, from the ego, and to find our true self. But how do we do that? Think a little bit about that. That's another brief part where we have a conversation. So just think about how can we do that? How can we free ourselves from our lower self, from the ego, and find our true self?
We have prayer, meditation, and love for others before ourselves.
Beautiful. Yes.
And service to others.
That's great.
I was thinking maybe like reflection, part of that is prayer, but also like reflection, bringing yourself to account, as the writings say, and self reflection on our interactions with people.
Yeah, thank you. These are all very important things. Prayer, meditation, and fasting, and all these spiritual tools we have. But there is actually one more thing, and one of you already hinted into that direction. The Guardian explains, the more we search for ourselves, the less likely we are to find ourselves. And the more we search for God and to serve our fellow men, the more profoundly will we become acquainted with ourselves, and the more inwardly assured. This is one of the great spiritual laws of life. Baha'u'llah himself reminded us to not be occupied with our own concerns. O people of God, do not busy yourselves in your own concerns. Let your thoughts be fixed upon that which will rehabilitate the fortunes of mankind and sanctify the hearts and souls of men. The freedom from the ego can only be attained by turning the focus from the me to the we, by developing a world-embracing view that generates a spirit of service, and by active involvement in society. Baha'u'llah wrote, "The liberty that profiteth you is to be found nowhere except in complete servitude unto God, the eternal truth. Whoso hath tasted of its sweetness will refuse to barter it for all the dominion of earth and heaven." So we can attain our inner freedom with service. Shoghi Effendi also explains that freeing ourselves from our ego is a lifelong spiritual process and that we cannot fully overcome it. The complete and entire elimination of the ego would imply perfection, which man can never completely attain. But the ego can and should be ever increasingly subordinated to the enlightened soul of man. This is what spiritual progress implies. Our outer freedom can be taken away, but not our inner freedom. We always have the freedom to decide on our attitude about the circumstances we are in. Abdul Baha wrote, "I myself was in prison 40 years. 1 year alone would have been impossible to bear. Nobody survived that imprisonment more than a year. But thank God, during all those 40 years, I was supremely happy. Every day on waking, it was like hearing good tidings, and every night, infinite joy was mine. Spirituality was my comfort, and turning to God was my greatest joy. If this had not been so, do you think it possible that I could have lived through those 40 years in prison?" Psychologist Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camp, confirmed this experience in his book, Man's Search for Meaning. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. So, how can we apply these teachings to environmental sustainability? First, we may think about planetary limits or boundaries. These boundaries define a safe operating space for humanity. Humanity has already transgressed 6 of 9 boundaries: biosphere integrity, climate change, freshwater change, biochemical flows, nitrogen and phosphorus, land system change, and novel entities. The novel entities boundary refers to things that are novel in a geological sense, such as chemical pollution and plastics. These are physical and biological limits that restrict our liberty, our outer freedom. If we ignore these limits or boundaries, we bring much harm to ourselves and even more to future generations. Let's have a brief look at 2 of these planetary boundaries, climate change and the loss of biodiversity, and discuss how the Baha'i teachings on liberty can be applied to them. For about 10,000 years, the Earth's climate has been stable. That is why humans have been able to do agriculture and to develop culture and civilizations. The climate has been stable because greenhouse gases in the atmosphere fluctuated only little. However, since the Industrial Revolution, human activities have released enormous amounts of greenhouse gases, which accumulated in the atmosphere and are now heating up the planet. Scientists don't know where the safe limit of carbon concentration is. Some point to 350 parts per million, but climatologist James Hansen thinks that we need to reduce them to 280 parts per million. That was the level where they were before the Industrial Revolution. This would be extremely difficult to do. For our purpose today, we just want to point out that with the current 420 parts per million and still increasing concentrations, humankind has far surpassed the planetary boundary for carbon. The resulting warming of the Earth causes serious disruptions in the climate system, leading to human suffering, and the consequences for future generations are unimaginable. Baha'u'llah clearly warned us to keep civilization within the restraints of moderation. He said, "Whoso cleaveth to justice can, under no circumstances, transgress the limits of moderation." The civilization, so often vaunted by the learned exponents of arts and sciences, will, if allowed to overleap the bounds of moderation, bring great evil upon men. If carried to excess, civilization will prove as prolific a source of evil as it had been of goodness when kept within the restraints of moderation. The day is approaching when its flame will devour the cities. Humanity has certainly carried material civilization to excess with the burning of fossil fuels, with deforestation and other industrial activities. We could interpret the words, "the day is approaching when its flame will devour the cities," literally, such as with the climate change impacts of wildfires and violent conflicts over diminishing natural resources. If we interpret it metaphorically, we may think of the devouring flame of materialism. And materialism is the underlying cause of environmental destruction. For many people, the symbol of freedom, what we would call outer freedom, is the car. One of you mentioned the car before. When you have a car, you can go anywhere, anytime. Moreover, the possession of a fancy car has become a status symbol. However, as you are all aware, burning gasoline contributes to greenhouse gas emissions. That is why many people advocate for electric cars. However, imagine the overwhelming amounts of natural resources and energy required to manufacture electric cars for all the households in the world. Especially the batteries require rare minerals such as cobalt and lithium, and their mining is associated with human rights violations and violence. Of course, electric cars can help to some degree to mitigate climate change, and further research into electric and hydrogen cars and their wider use are certainly beneficial. However, instead of being preoccupied with the privilege of the few to enjoy the freedom of a car, it may be better to focus on the freedom of all to be able to transport themselves and to travel by improving and electrifying public transportation. Bike riding, including electric bikes, will also be safer if there are fewer cars. This brings us back to the words of Baha'u'llah. Arise, O people, and by the power of God's might, resolve to gain the victory over your own selves, that haply the whole earth may be freed and sanctified from its servitude to the gods of its idle fancies. We can conclude that the gods of idle fancies don't only stand in the way of our personal spiritual growth, they destroy the earth. A practical example is the god of the car. Humanity's liberty to release greenhouse gases requires restriction. We need strong laws to limit and eventually eliminate the use of fossil fuels. The loss of biodiversity has also very long-term consequences for humankind. The Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services reports that the life of humanity depends on 50,000 wild species. They meet our needs for food, cosmetics, shelter, clothing, medicine, and inspiration. But now, 1 million species of plants and animals face extinction. This has far-reaching consequences, including endangering economies, food security, and livelihoods. There are basically 5 reasons for the loss of biodiversity: changes in land and sea use, invasive alien species, direct exploitation of organisms, climate change, and pollution. A major reason is the loss of habitat due to changes in land and sea use. This has historically been the main cause for biodiversity loss. The Plan 30 by 30 is a worldwide initiative for governments to designate 30% of Earth's land and ocean area as protected areas by 2030. This means wise land planning and limiting expansion of human infrastructure, and this affects human liberty. Invasive alien species are another cause of biodiversity loss. They are displacing native plants and animals. They can outcompete native species for space, habitat, and food. This causes population declines in native species. The problem of invasive alien species has hugely increased during the past years. The new assessment report by the IPBES makes the following statements. The threats from invasive alien species are increasing in all regions of the Earth and are predicted to do so in the future. Invasive alien species cause dramatic and, in some cases, irreversible changes to biodiversity and ecosystems. The economy, food security, water security, and human health are profoundly and negatively affected by invasive alien species. Addressing the problem of invasive alien species requires laws and regulations that are enforced. Such laws may interfere with companies' or individuals' desires to do whatever they want. In other words, their liberty needs to be restricted in certain areas. For example, no trade of invasive plants or animals, be they for agricultural uses or for pets. So again, individual liberty must be restricted for the common good. Another factor for the loss of biodiversity is the direct exploitation of organisms, for example, by overfishing and overhunting and poaching. Overfishing means to catch so many fish that the fish population greatly diminishes or even collapses. the breeding stock of an area becomes so depleted that the fish cannot replenish themselves. Global estimates confirm that about 34% of marine wild fish stocks are overfished, and that 66% are fished within biologically sustainable levels. Of course, the problem of overexploitation is not confined to fishing. Many tree species are threatened by unsustainable logging, and unsustainable hunting is a threat to more than 1,000 wild mammal species. You may remember the exhortation of Baha'u'llah in the Kitab Aqdas. Take heed that ye hunt not to excess. Tread ye the path of justice and equity in all things. Of course, hunting can also have a broader meaning and include fishing, cutting trees, and using other natural resources. Here again, we must apply moderation, that is, restrict our liberty. Climate change has already contributed to biodiversity decline, but it is becoming an increasingly serious factor in the loss of animals and plants. Combating climate change is strongly opposed by powerful people with vested interests who don't want to be restricted in their freedom to pollute. Another significant reason is pollution of all kinds, such as chemical pollution and plastics, as well as agricultural runoff. Addressing all of these causes of biodiversity loss requires wise and just laws and regulations, which will restrict the liberty of individuals and companies. Human life depends on the rich diversity of plants and animals. Moreover, each created being has intrinsic value. It is not right when we destroy God's creation. It is really a matter of justice that the liberty or freedom to exploit natural resources and to pollute the environment is restricted. The application of justice has also various social dimensions. If a corporation cuts down forests, it deprives the local population, often indigenous peoples, of resources and even of their way of life and subsistence. Poor people and minorities often suffer the most from industrial pollution. Justice toward future generations requires very urgent action to prevent more pollution and the further destruction of the environment. Here again the words of Baha'u'llah: whoso cleaveth to justice can, under no circumstances, transgress the limits of moderation. As a society, how can we stay within the limits of moderation and not exceed our liberty? We come back to the need for strong laws and regulations. Here again the words of Abdul Baha: the law must reign and not the individual. Thus will the world become a place of beauty and true brotherhood will be realized. Having attained solidarity, men will have found truth. So we need laws that keep greenhouse gas emissions in check, that prevent deforestation, overfishing, and other unsustainable practices. Good laws can protect the commons, such as air, water, the oceans and forests, the resources that belong to all of humankind. They can protect them from individuals and companies that put their selfish interests before the well-being of other people and nature. Such laws and regulations restrict our outer freedom, but they are necessary to safeguard the right to life, the freedom to exist for all people, to safeguard the human right to a healthy environment, to safeguard nature for other life forms, and to safeguard the planet for future generations. In many cultures, especially in the American culture, such restrictions of outer freedom are strongly opposed by many people. The opposition to the restriction of outer freedom by laws and regulations is certainly a major cause of all the efforts to prevent climate action by shedding doubts on climate science and spreading disinformation. The opposition to the restriction of outer freedom is also a major reason for the gun culture in America. Many people equate carrying a gun with freedom and are vehemently opposed to gun regulations that would address the catastrophic gun violence in that country. Generally, the same people who oppose gun laws also oppose climate action. They don't want to be restricted in their freedom. Of course, this understanding of freedom is extremely self-centered. Their freedom to bear arms takes away the basic freedom to life for many other people who are killed by gun violence. Their right or freedom to pollute the air or water to increase the profit of their company takes away the right to a healthy life and a stable climate from the many people who are harmed by pollution or extreme weather events caused by global warming. The root of the problem is a false understanding of what freedom really means. Let us read the words of Abdu'l-Baha again and focus on the last sentence. The law must reign and not the individual. Thus will the world become a place of beauty and true brotherhood will be realized. Having attained solidarity, men will have found truth. If people have attained solidarity, they support each other and act in favor of the well-being of all, of the common good. Solidarity is necessary for the creation of laws that are just. Solidarity is also necessary for society to support and uphold the laws. Laws only work well on the foundation of solidarity. So, outer freedom must be restricted by laws and regulations if it infringes on the freedom of others and is harmful to the common good. On the other hand, outer freedom that serves the common good is essential for the protection of human rights and of the environment. For example, people should have the freedom to advocate for environmentally and socially responsible laws, regulations, and infrastructure, such as clean energy or sustainable agriculture. And they should have the freedom to speak out against environmentally destructive practices. In many countries, environmental and human rights defenders are persecuted and killed by vested interests and governments. The most important role of the government is to protect its own people and to uphold their freedom and human rights. We also have the outer freedom to choose how we live our personal lives, how environmentally responsible our actions are. Of course, executing this freedom may sometimes hit limits, such as economic factors, or when there are no environmentally responsible options. For example, your survival may depend on driving a car to work, and there is no good public transportation. When we do not have an environmentally responsible option, our freedom is restricted by social conditions. Climate change and other environmental problems pose limits to our outer freedom, both individually and as a society. They force us to invent a new way of life. This opens a world of opportunity. We need to learn to be more creative. Creativity can only unfold if there are limits, or you could say rules or laws. In other words, the limits to our outer freedom create the opportunity for the creativity of inner freedom to develop. I will try to explain this with two examples that show the importance of limits for creativity to unfold. When you put a young child into a room full of new toys, the child will look at all the toys. If you give the child only one toy, the child will explore the many ways the toy can be used and will thus apply more creative thinking. Let me share with you a brief example from music. European classical music developed over many centuries, going through different styles. All of these styles and harmonic systems consisted of many rules of composition. The harmonic system reached a very high and complex degree in the so-called Romantic style in the 19th century. After reaching this culmination, musicians were no longer able to develop it further, and thus wanted to break out from the tonal system. And that posed a serious problem. If you abandon all the rules of the harmonic system, there is anarchy and chaos. It is impossible to be creative without any limits. Therefore, the composers set up new rules. One of the systems they designed was called 12-tone music, in which each one of the 12 tones was not allowed to be played until all other tones were heard before. So there was a rigid series of tones, but the composer had the freedom to create the tone series and to vary it rhythmically and in other ways. Similarly, if we try to live an environmentally responsible life, we can be more creative. As a society, how can we create a clean energy infrastructure? How can we apply the science of sustainable agricultural methods in a community? How can we set up social structures that enable the sharing of tools, machines, and the volunteering of time? Similarly, on the individual level, how can I live with what I already have instead of buying new things? How can I mend and repair things? How can I reuse things? How can we share things? The first picture shows how people have creatively used old clothing called fabric scraps to create beautiful quilt blankets. The second picture shows a bag made out of recycled plastic bags. This brings us directly to the topic of inner freedom regarding environmental sustainability. Inner freedom does not have any limitations, except our own ego that may stand in the way. We can use our inner freedom to choose to live an environmentally responsible life. This means making many moral choices throughout the day, of course, within the restraints of our circumstances. The Universal House of Justice wrote, "Every choice a Baha'i makes, as employee or employer, producer or consumer, borrower or lender, benefactor or beneficiary, leaves a trace. And the moral duty to lead a coherent life demands that one's economic decisions be in accordance with lofty ideals, that the purity of one's aims be matched by the purity of one's actions to fulfill those aims." So we can free ourselves from the domination of materialism and consumerism. The inner freedom from the ego and being concerned with the well-being of society is the best protection from materialism and allows us to become more creative. In addition, we have the freedom to decide how to react to environmental laws and regulations. They may at times restrict our outer freedom, or perhaps consist in paying a tax on carbon. We can choose to accept and support such laws that are necessary to protect people and the environment, or we can choose to be angry and oppose them. Remember the words of Abdul Baha about the importance of solidarity regarding just laws. In summary, outer freedom is essential in the areas of freedom from oppression and freedom of belief and expression. But outer freedom requires restriction in other areas, such as with moderation in civilization and consumption, and with laws that protect people and the environment from harmful actions, such as criminal behavior and pollution. Inner freedom, on the other hand, is unlimited. It means breaking the cage of the ego, the lower self. Baha'u'llah wrote in the Hidden Words, "O son of spirit, burst thy cage asunder, and even as the phoenix of love, soar into the firmament of holiness. Renounce thyself, and, filled with the spirit of mercy, abide in the realm of celestial sanctity." This is spiritual development, and it can happen with service and submission to the will of God. All these conditions combined allow creativity to develop, including the creativity to invent new sustainable ways of living on this planet. There is a direct relationship between outer limits, moderation, inner freedom, and responsible actions. Our spiritual life, service, and social action are intricately connected and interdependent. Let me conclude with the words of Baha'u'llah. Mankind in its entirety must firmly adhere to whatsoever hath been revealed and vouchsafed unto it. Then and only then will it attain unto true liberty. Thank you, friends. This was a little bit long. You have been shown a lot of perseverance, and I see that there are many chat contributions, and I haven't read them. So please share your thoughts and comments. And
if anyone has any comments or questions, you can put them in the chat or just raise your hand. Winnie.
Yes. Oh, Christine, this is stellar. Oh, thank you so much. It is going to go far and wide, I'm sure, when you get it on YouTube. I wanted to mention a couple of things. I recently heard someone in media saying how bound they've been by their law to be balanced in their reporting, and how they have always tried to show each side of an issue. But when you do that, you propagate untruth and other things that are harmful. So I wanted to mention that. And then also that as Baha'is, I feel we have a powerful tool for us to, in our own lives, combat materialism. Because when we look at the laws of a hukuk, we are looking at what do we need and what do we want. And that gets it down to a lot of thoughtfulness and may change over time as well. Thank you so much, Christine.
thank you, Winnie. You always share profound thoughts. And the law of Hokukola, it's central actually to this topic.
One of your comments toward the beginning was about the difference between a culture that focuses on the self and a culture that focuses on others, and how the Baha'i writings say we need to focus more on others. Do we see in the world, we have probably particular Asian cultures and some other places in the world more than our Western societies that are more focused on others from a cultural standpoint. Are they doing better on these high-level climate goals or other high-level societal goals that require cooperation, maybe like gun control, than our individualistic societies?
It's not that I would know the answer, but I have a guess, yes, that in many of these cultures, they have less of a problem with gun violence because the guns are not as much available. And but I cannot really say like about their spiritual individual progress, because there is also a balance. You know, we cannot, it's very important for society to have, and for individuals, that we have the well-being of the whole in mind. I think that is absolutely important. But I don't think we should criticize Western civilization for its breakthroughs in science that were actually the prerequisite for that was that humans were able to distance themselves from nature, that they had an objective view on nature. Otherwise, you could not do research. So I think we need a combination of all of that, but always with the you know, the well-being of the common good in mind. We have two hands up, Reuben and Arthur. Reuben, you want to speak first?
Okay, ma'am. Inspiring talk. I learned a lot from it, but I have a question. Do you have a suggestion for societies where the lawmakers are against putting in place these policies that can sort of curb climate change? For example, in my society, everyone is aware of, you know, CO2 emission in the atmosphere, how bad it is for the environment, and how bad it is for climate change. However, the people in the system, the governing body, they stand a lot to gain by just looking the other way without doing anything. To be more specific, I come from Nigeria, so there's a lot of oil exploration activities going on there. And if you go to regions where these industries are, they basically burn their fossil fuel in the air, and it affects the immediate environment. Like, the evidence is clear that what the companies are doing are bad for the environment. But these companies sort of just talk to a government official that's in charge of that area and sort of offer them some money, and they're okay with it. They just look the other way, and the community keeps suffering. So asking, are they active, you know, suggestions you have for situations like this that we can put in place to sort of curb that activity? Because I could go on and give many examples of how different parastatals in the government are just looking away. So that's my question.
Thank you, Reuben. That was very important contribution. And but let's first have Arthur speak before I share my thoughts.
I think partly in response to that question, what you've described so beautifully this evening is the importance of our understanding, you know, liberty or freedom and its limitations as an individual and our spiritual growth. But we have so often built these same values of selfishness and ego into the institutions of our society. And they don't have a soul. They are not seeking any kind of spiritual development. And therefore, we have to say, how do we take this kind of a thinking beyond the individual level to say, how do we have to restructure society itself and its institutions? Whether it be, you know, as in the case of Nigeria, the oil industry and so on, you know, they've known for 40 years that they were destroying the climate. But because their only value is increasing profits for the shareholders, they couldn't care less about what they're doing outside. So we've institutionalized many of these things we've been warned about, the excessive civilization. So we have to look at very fundamental changes in society, and how do we go beyond the individual spiritual challenge to leverage the change in society and that is required to go beyond the disaster we're heading at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arthur. Of course, you said the essential thing in response. One thought I had was that we need a spiritual transformation of all of society, so that corruption and can be avoided. We need like foster in the community the values of truthfulness and trustworthiness and justice, and build it up from the grassroots, like that these are important values. And also what we can do from the grassroots up is cultivate knowledge and sustainable practices to prepare for larger scale changes. But we can do small things in our own communities while trying to, with educational activities, trying to prepare for larger scale change in government. Or governance, I would say, not government.
We have a comment in the comment stream about speaking with your local representatives. How does that fit into what you just said, Christine?
Oh, that's very good. Yeah, I mean, if we are able to talk with representative of institutions of government, that's always helpful. And we have been trying this here where we live. And for example, I'm part of Rhode Island Interfaith Power&Light. And so we do these things on the local level. And I think we can do this as individuals and as part of even of a Baha'i community. We can go and talk with the mayor or with the town council and say, well, we think we need to take action in certain areas. Winnie, you have your hand up.
I am very committed to thinking about our youngest generations, because they are so pure-hearted and clear in their thinking, much clearer than their adults who have vested interests. So I would focus, if I had limited energy and resources, on the very youngest in society, because they are the ones that hopefully will be able to implement change. It's so embedded that it will be difficult for older ones to do so.
Thank you.
We have a question about COP28, which is a perfect opportunity for me to announce next month's webinar on January 6th. We have an entire webinar devoted to talking about COP28. We have a few folks who are going to attend and going to report back to us on what happened. And I put the link in the chat, and you can register now if you're interested. Arthur or Christine, you want to chime in about next month's webinar on COP28?
Well, we could probably always say that binational community has planned a whole series of activities at COP28, both trying to bring values into the discussion in various fora, working in interfaith collaboration with other faith groups to bring some of these issues forward. There are also a number of other Baha'is who are directly involved, in their expert capacities and activities there. So, while with 70,000 people, nobody can have an enormous impact. Certainly, the Baha'is are active there and are quite visible in what they're contributing to COP28. We'll see what the result is, and that we'll talk about at the webinar in January.
Well, it's not very transcendent, my thought, but I just want to appreciate Christine having distinguished inner and outer freedom and made it so very clear what the writings say about the one and the other, and then giving examples from other non-Baha'i sources as well. It just made it all very clear. And excuse me, I didn't realize that there was such, I mean, I have the little booklet, Rights and Responsibilities, that is a collection of quotes, which I've always loved. So I really loved how you've presented this today, because it's a little bit similar in the sense of, yes, we have rights, but also we have responsibilities. Yes, we have the right to freedom, but it's inner freedom. And outer freedom needs to be restricted. And it's interesting how, I don't know where everyone is, but in Canada, there's been such a struggle about COVID and the freedom to not get a vaccination or to have one. And then are we able to get all of the information that we need in order to be able to make a good decision, which kind of relates to what Winnie was saying about media, you know, are we hearing just one side of the story? And why are we hearing from the other side when maybe it represents only 5% of the population and this one represents 85%? So I just, I will have to reflect and read some of these quotes again. I've tried to take them down because you shared so much today. It's very thoughtful. Thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Brenda. Maybe we can share the PowerPoint someplace on the IEF website or so. Then you can have just the slides. You don't have to listen to this terribly long talk. You know, you can just look for the slides and see where they are from. And yeah.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much.
Dawn.
Yes, I was thinking, this reminds me, your talk reminds me so much of, there was this, the House of Justice wrote a letter to the United States many years ago. And the title of it was Individual Rights and Freedoms. And it was so many years ago. It's just was so prophetic, really, I think, looking at the situation where we are right now in terms of personal freedoms and responsibilities. So I recommend that to anyone. Maybe we need to go back and read that letter.
So thank you so much, all of you, for contributing and for participating. It's always great to see you all, and I hope that you stay well and that we see you again on the 6th of January for the next webinar. And Kayla, thank you so much for organizing them.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone.